Welcome to the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis. Join hosts Aaron Smith and Jimmy Young as they dive into the pulse of the cannabis industry, featuring weekly guests who break down big topics like standardization, evolving regulations, and exclusive member spotlights. Get informed, get inspired. And now, here are your hosts, Aaron and Jimmy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast. I'm PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, and I should remind everybody that this particular podcast is supported by Buds Group, a consulting service out of New Jersey, and also by the Maverick Group out of Denver, Colorado. And joining me, as always, is Aaron Smith, the Executive Director of the National Cannabis Industry Association. And today we're joined by a very special guest. It's Michelle Rutter Friberg from, I can't believe it, you're from the NCIA too, aren't you, Michelle?
And do you sure am, and it's a pleasure to be here with y'all today.
And you must have an official title, because I was not briefed on that.
I do. I am the Director of Government Relations here at NCIA. I've been here for about a decade now. So hopefully folks have met me. And if not, I'll hopefully see you in Washington, D.C. for our upcoming lobby days.
Well, you know what? That's a great segue. We obviously want to talk about the lobby days right off the bat, because I know that's a premier event, kind of your signature event. And it's also coming off another lobby day exhibition that was in Washington, D.C. this past week. And that was the Cannabis Unity group that was organized by the Last Prisoner Project that we all kind of support, certainly in every capacity, because we're all in this together. Right, Michelle?
That's absolutely right. There's no greater show of unity than Cannabis Unity Week. We're so lucky that our friends over at Last Prisoner Project put this incredible event together for the second year in a row. NCIA is proud to have been advocacy partners for that event this year as well as last year. But alongside NCIA, dozens of cannabis reform like-minded groups, industry groups, advocacy groups that don't even necessarily always work solely on drug reform. But again, they all unified, got together, and went over on Capitol Hill to talk about the need for drug policy reform. And to reform our nation's outdated drug laws. They also did a number of different events here in DC over the course of that week. And so we're really excited. This is our 13th annual lobby day, Aaron. I'm sure we'll be excited to speak more about that and how this event has evolved over the years. But, coming back for our 13th annual lobby day, or our annual fly-in, you might hear us call it those two things interchangeably. But we're really excited, of course, to be back in Washington, DC with all of our members, but also really excited, like you said, Jimmy, to build off of the momentum from Unity Day and Unity Week, really, I should say, rather, and continue to remind our members of Congress that this is an issue that we cannot let fall by the wayside, despite how much is going on in the world.
That's right. And Aaron, this is your big moment, because this is the kind of like the premier event of the National Cannabis Industry Association every year. So tell us what we can expect.
Yes, we love lobby days, is because it's an opportunity for our members to get in front of members of Congress, and it kind of helps educate both sides of the equation. Members of Congress need to hear, they're hearing from Michelle every day and hearing from lobbyists, but they're not hearing directly from the industry, except in times like the lobby days event. So this is an opportunity for them to learn. It's also an opportunity for our members to learn kind of how the sausage is made in DC, and how to interact with the government in order to advance positive policy reform.
And you're going to allow me in that environment to speak my mind. Is that correct? Is that
looking forward to it.
We'll make sure we give you all the same training and talking points that all of our members get, Jimmy, so that we make sure that you stay on message.
That's right. And duct tape works very well too. I'm not afraid of being edited in any way. Aaron, what's going to be the keynote? What's going to be the thing that gets you the most excited about next week?
So we have a series of events, and the meat of lobby days is really individual meetings on Capitol Hill between our members and members of Congress and their staff. Michelle is working on scheduling all of those, and has been diligently for weeks. But that kind of the crescendo, so to speak, is we have a closing reception, which will feature congressional representatives who are champions for the industry, as well as, of course, the lobby days participants or other VIPs on Capitol Hill. That's the evening of May 14th. And I think that's going to be, sort of a very high energy event. Always look forward to that. We're going to be giving out a couple of awards to some congressional champions, as well as our Steve Fox Excellence in Advocacy Award to one of the members out there that'll be in attendance.
And I have to say, Aaron, I'm really excited this year that we have something new as a part of Lobby Days, which is our National Stakeholder Summit, which is open to the public. So depending on when folks are listening to this, that's going to be on Tuesday, May the 13th. Of course, people can check out all of these events and more at thecannabisindustry.org. But I'm really excited for that event as well. People can come, network, talk with other folks that are part of the industry, but also talk with Washington insiders and some other people and learn all the tips and tricks for how to best be an advocate even once you go home.
And you guys, the goal is to make the reform movement more of a priority than what has happened over the last, I don't know, 100 odd days or so. And that being said, we did have that word as part of the confirmation hearing for Terrence Cole in front of the U.S. Senate. And I'm interested to get both your reactions on how he handled Senator Padilla's direct question, basically about, well, are you going to pick up the rescheduling move or not? Aaron, I'm going to get your comment first, and then I know we can go to Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a measured response, as you would expect from anybody in that position in a confirmation hearing on either side of the aisle. I think that it was about as positive, frankly, as one could expect. They're somewhat non-committal, and I know it's frustrating, I'm sure, to a lot of us in the movement that there wasn't a commitment that rescheduling was going to happen from day one. But to put it in perspective, it was a pretty positive to show that he's knows it's an issue. It's going to move on it one way or the other. And I note that really nobody in the country who's probably kind of qualified to be the head of the DEA or in line to be the DEA is really going to be a cannabis champion. It's pretty unlikely. This is a law enforcement agency.
Right. That's where I was going, is that they want to enforce some law at some point, and they know that the laws between the federal and the states are all screwed up. I think we all can agree on that. Michelle, you agree with that too?
Oh, well, I certainly can agree that our state and federal cannabis laws are completely out of step with one another. I can absolutely say that. But, to give people a little bit of background here on this, and Aaron, you kind of just alluded to it a moment ago about the fact that Terrence Cole, you'll hear me probably call him both of those things, but that, Terry Cole is a former law enforcement officer, but as recently as I believe last year was actually on record as saying something to the effect of, and you all know how I feel about marijuana, so don't even ask. And so, when you, juxtapose that answer from, again, about a year ago with some of the answers that we heard during the Senate Judiciary Committee's confirmation hearing of Mr. Cole just recently, you can see how they're sort of at odds with one another. But, that's not to say that our politicians and our policymakers shouldn't evolve. So I just say that people should be aware of folks' record and what they've said in the past. But I also think that it's a good sign that when asked about this, that he did leave the door open. That being said, Senator Padilla essentially asked him, what are you going to do on this? And while Mr. Cole essentially said something that to the effect of, I got to check it on this and see where it's at in the process. I want to review the science. And, Senator Padilla pushed back on that and said, well, we already have the science. And so for folks who are following along at home, you might remember that the previous administration, the Biden administration, when they, started the review of how marijuana is scheduled, federally, one of the first things that happened during that process was that the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, issued a report that recommended that marijuana be moved to Schedule 3, which is part of the whole, rescheduling hearings that have now been, indefinitely paused, which also were brought up in the confirmation hearing. So that's all to say, we have seen the science on this. So when Mr. Cole comes back and says, well, I want to review the science, well, we look forward to him reviewing that report. Now, that's not to say that, I'm not a scientist, I'm a lobbyist, but, there are certainly those of us in the field and across different industries that believe that, the science probably shows that maybe marijuana shouldn't be scheduled at all, but maybe that's a topic for another podcast. But, at the end of the day, Jimmy, this is step one. We, the confirmation hearing for Mr. Cole, that was just step one. So now that the Senate has held the confirmation hearing, they have a couple more days still. And again, depends on when you're listening to this, but from when we're recording, Mr. Cole still has, and the senators still have a couple days where they can submit written questions to him for him to answer after the fact. So once then that period closes, the Senate Judiciary Committee will have to have Mr. Cole come back. The committee will vote and say, yes, we believe that this confirmation process should move to the full Senate floor, which we believe will happen. And then the full Senate will vote on his confirmation. So So he hasn't actually been confirmed yet. We still have a few steps to go, but again, no indications that he's not going to be confirmed for this position.
And I would add too that Terry Cole's position on this is not as relevant as probably a DEA administrator in another administration, because President Trump, for better or worse, has made clear that loyalty and adherence to his policy agenda is the number one, if not the only qualification for running a federal agency. And he's on record as supporting rescheduling and states' rights. And I think that regardless of where Cole is on this, I'm hopeful that the president will send the edict from on high that this needs to happen. And we saw in the previous administration there was hesitance in the DEA to actually move on the policy that the president put forth, and that would be what this president would call the deep state, pushing back against the elected will of the people. This, again, for better or worse, this administration is much less tolerant of the deep state or the career folks at DEA that want to do something that's counters what the administration itself is advocating for.
Yeah,
gives me some hope.
I'm certainly more concerned about what the people want. I don't call me crazy, guys. I mean, this has been going on, and again, Michelle, look, I've been following it not as long as you. You've been in it for at least a decade. I'll go 7 years following this, and I have learned such a great lesson about our government and learning how it actually works, or more importantly, is really good at delay. They're very good at delay. Let's study that more. Let's take a look at this. Are they afraid to make decisions? Aaron, I'm going to ask you that question first. Are they just afraid of making a decision? Because even if you make a decision, you can always change it down the road if you realize that your decision maybe wasn't the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're afraid, but they certainly don't seem really eager to make a lot of bold changes in Congress. And I mean, we could be having a podcast about any other social issue, advocating for any other industry, and be saying the same thing. You could look back at the last 15 years since NCIA was founded, and there hasn't been any real bold legislation outside of a tax cut and some infrastructure, financial issues, nothing that has addressed any of the big social issues in the country. So it is, in part, I think it's there's constitutional limitations that keep the government from moving too quickly. There's things like the filibuster in the Senate that, make it almost impossible to get big changes through. And then there's just the momentum or inertia, I should say, of decades and decades, almost a century of prohibition.
Yeah.
Yeah, and building off of that, back in college, I won't come as a surprise to probably most of you that I was a political science major, but I was a history minor, and I'm a big history buff, self-proclaimed history buff, I should say. I see Jimmy pointing at himself. He says, "Me too." But to your point there, Jimmy, are they afraid? There's a number of different things at play here that why reform hasn't happened. And like you said, Aaron, I think that's a really good point, that it's not just this issue, that this is something that all different issues, whether they're social or not, that are grappling with this in Washington. I talk to other friends and colleagues of mine that work in the city on a number of different issues. We're all still coming up against the same things. And I think it's for a number of reasons, right? So, and I do think that they're related. There's just process, right? There's just the way that Congress works. You have to have bills reintroduced every session, which, sounds so elementary, like when I say it out loud, but I talk to folks, and this is no shame or shade on their civics lesson, but people forget, oh yeah, every 2 years you have to reintroduce every single piece of legislation. So my Safe Banking Act, and I'm going to call it mine because I named it, my Safe Banking Act, that ended last session with well over 100 co-sponsors in the House, hasn't even been reintroduced this session yet. And I can guarantee you that unfortunately when it does, I don't think it's going to be reintroduced probably with that same number. Or, you also have different processes, like literally just how the rules function. So you have things like the House Rules Committee, which by default are stacked in favor of the majority party. And that's, again, on purpose. But then you have rules like closed rules and open rules and suspension rules and whether or not you can offer things on the floor or not. So there's the process here about why we haven't gotten things done. But then relatedly, like I said, there's also history here. By default, the Senate, and again, this is getting back to why I brought up that I'm a big history buff, the Senate Senate by default, its whole point is to slow things down. It is to make sure that it is the more deliberative body. Now, I think they might have taken things to an extreme. Somebody read Federalist 10 over there and decided that they were really going, and again, so many history nerd jokes in here, but somebody really decided to take it to an extreme. But again, I think that this comes back to what we were talking about at the top here about the importance of advocacy, that this cannot fall by the wayside. And the only way that this industry and that we, and I use the royal we here, we as an industry, we as a movement, we as people who support drug policy, cannabis reform, we have to show up. We have to be involved. We have seen what not showing up and not being involved gets us. And we have seen what doing the bare minimum gets us. And it ain't nothing. Because here we are again, 10 years later, and we still haven't passed banking. So if you're interested in hearing more of me on my soapbox and history lessons, again, come to lobby days. But in all seriousness, I think it really does go to show, though, that we have to show up. The old saying of, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. It is incredibly true here in Washington. I hope y'all will join me for a meal next week so that we can be together at the table and not on the menu.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. And just for the record, I take offense to the history nerd thing. I was a history major. And you know what history really is? It's old news, which is why
it's gossip. It's old gossip. That's what I've been telling people lately. it's the tea.
Well,
it's the history tea.
It is old news. It's history. And we're supposed to learn from the past. I'm not quite sure that's actually happening right now. Right, but at least we understand the concept is still there. Can I want to get both your feelings, if that's okay, about the States Act, because that is something that is in play right now, and it's been in play in the past. In fact, I'm pretty sure, I think it actually passed the House at one point, didn't it? But it never passed. Okay, good. See, I needed that. So tell me, does the States Act have a chance to actually go to the floor and perhaps move over to the Senate at some point? Or is it a lost cause, guys? Because, I think you all have a hazardous duty ahead of you, because I think this is a very big, challenging Congress to deal with.
As a lobbyist who's been in this space for over a decade, like I said, cautious optimism is the name of my game. I try to practice that more than cynicism when I can. But that all being said, I do have cautious optimism about the state's 2.0 Act. I know for a fact that Congressman Joyce, who is the lead sponsor of this, there's a couple others alongside him I should mention, his colleague, Congresswoman Dina Titus, who's both of them are the co-chairs of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus. But this bill has strong bipartisan support. And it is a bill that I know for a fact that Congressman Joyce has been talking actively to leadership about and socializing this, so that, that when I'm giving a legislative update, that the thing I inevitably have to say to people is, but leadership won't let it come to the floor, so that we don't come up against that. So I think there is a good chance. I think that it still has a long road ahead of it. Again, this is going to be something that our members are going to be talking to congressional offices about next week. We really want to get those co-sponsorship numbers up. So we're hopeful in a future episode of this podcast that we can come back and tell you guys about all the great strides and all the people that we hopefully get to sign on to that bill. But I think that bill has a good chance of making it to the floor. And I believe that if Speaker Johnson, assuming that he's still Speaker, which no shade to him, I'm just saying lots of things going on. But if he were to let it get to the floor, my point being, no matter who the Speaker is, my personal opinion is that no matter who that leader or Speaker of the House would be, is that they're not putting this, especially a bill like this, but a marijuana bill on the floor unless they know and want it to win. They're not going to put it up for failure unless they want it to fail, in which case they could also do that to send a message. But again, we're going with the cautious optimism here. So I do believe that if this bill were brought to the floor, that it would be done so knowing that the votes were there to pass, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. But again, we need y'all to show up and to be talking to your members of Congress about this, so that we can make sure that we can continue this momentum, because we're already almost halfway through the year, which is crazy to think.
Aaron, go ahead, because I know
the States Act is a great piece of legislation, probably almost ideal from an industry standpoint, in that it's limited taxes, limited federal regulation, but would allow for the states their systems to flourish. And I share the cautious optimism. I think that all eyes are still in the White House, though. I don't think that Speaker Johnson's going to wake up one day and decide that he wants to move cannabis reform, unless we get a signal from Trump saying, which I think could come in, along with a rescheduling move, something along those lines. I think that's the most likely way that this is going to be moved, is if the president pushes for that. And then, because typically you need to have a majority of the majority to get anything done, and that's been, I think, since Dennis Hastert was speaker. So there's my history nerdum there. And so that, because we don't necessarily we have perhaps a majority of Congress when you factor in the Democrats, but if we don't have the majority of the majority, I think it will take the president to really push for that.
It's my background, Michelle, I don't know if you know this, is in sports. So everything goes back to sports with me. And you've got two teams here. Okay. You got one on one side and one on the other side. No names here. You got one team on one side, one on the other. And they don't want whatever you said. I'm going to do a counter. And whatever you say, we have to get back to finding ways to find common ground. And when you have an issue with 70% of the populace of the United States of America wanting legalization, or at least federal reform would be a good start, whether we go to the legalization side of things or we just leave it up to the states like the States Act wants. Why are we even, this shouldn't even be argued. This is what bothers me. It's like, guys, get over your darn selves and make a decision. Am I a little naive for Washington, D.C.?
No, you're too logical. My old boss used to tell me that I would say things like that when I first started, and he would always say to me, Michelle, you're too logical for this. Your brain is going too much in order. That's not, and the truth of the matter, I mean, you're completely right, Jimmy. Well, almost a super majority of Americans believe that this should be legal. But if Congress acquiesced, or, frankly, really passed legislation that agreed with the will of the people, we'd be living in a very different country right now.
Yes. Yes. No,
because again, getting back to other social issues, you know what I mean? And that's just unfortunate. And again, that goes back to process, right? Because you have members of Congress who, again, maybe their state has voted for medical marijuana or for adult use marijuana, but maybe they're a little bit older and they are, grew up at a time of just say no, or, just a more of a conservative background in terms of how, the war on drugs was, viewed. Maybe you have folks who they just don't sit on a relevant committee. So they're sitting on, an important committee like transportation and infrastructure, which again, certainly could touch issues related to this, right? DUID being a quick one that comes to mind. But again, that's not like the big committee of jurisdiction when we're talking about tax issues or legalization broadly or banking. So, I think it all goes back to that there's a process that we have to follow. But I think, Jimmy, to your point, bipartisanship cannot be viewed as a bad thing. And again, I think that we're seeing this in other issues as well outside of cannabis. But if we do not work together with the other side, we will continue to have prohibition. That's not an opinion. That's a fact.
Probably the most important thing to make American great, guys. I'm sorry to use an old cliche here, but that's what this country needs to figure out a way to do. Anyway,
well, they always say in Washington, compromise is a dirty word, and we got to get away from that.
And at least one could say that over the years, the challenge we're facing has changed. The challenge used to be we couldn't get many members of Congress to even stand up and support marijuana reform. That's where we were when we started NCIA. There were 2 or 3 members that would support it. Now we fast forward to today, almost nobody wants to come out and publicly oppose it. But we're up against the problems that every other interest group is up against, which is just congressional dysfunction. I think there are a lot of underlying foundational issues that are far beyond NCIA's scope that need to be tackled in order to get past that dysfunction. But so, if you look at it on the bright side, we have made a lot of progress, but we still have a long way to go. And and the fact that we are up against this particular partisan environment means that anyone in the industry who's invested in a cannabis business needs to double down their investment on cannabis policy reform, or we just won't get it, because there are so many other issues, so many other competing priorities, and this kind of seemingly insurmountable task. But it's not insurmountable if we just invest in it and keep working.
Yeah. And if you've ever sat around the dinner table and complained about politics or 280E or anything related to your small business and running it, That's why you need to show up next week. I don't want to hear it. If you know what I mean? Like, again, if you cannot, and again, you don't have to be able to afford to come out to DC. All politics is local. You can be an advocate from home. But if you are frustrated with the state of the industry, or, you want reform, you have to show up. So show up with us. We'll do all the hard work for you. All you got to do is get to DC. We'll make your schedule. You'll have a great time doing it, and you'll be back every year.
There you go. And Aaron, I want to thank you. I look forward to it. Now, I am one of the few people, certainly on this call, that remembers black and white movies. And there's one in particular, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, starring James Stewart. Now, I am not going to be playing the role of Mr. Smith because I am Mr. Young, but I am going to Washington and I am looking forward to it. And Michelle, I'm really looking forward to seeing you and meeting you in person. It's one of the beautiful things about Zoom calls and all this now is, you get to know people and then you get to see them in 3D. Some of the people that I'm friendly with in the cannabis space, I've never seen in 3D. So I'm looking forward to that, and I appreciate that. And that good. Anything else before I wrap this up, Aaron?
No, I mean, I'm looking forward to being there with you and all of our members, Jimmy. And I think it should be mentioned that for those that are attending, there'll be an opportunity to sit down and maybe even be a guest on this podcast.
There you go. And we welcome all comers. So for Aaron Smith and for Michelle, I so appreciate you guys joining us here on the Voice of Cannabis podcast, courtesy of our friends at the National Cannabis Industry Association. And we'll see you at Lobby Days in Washington, D.C.
We focus solely on the cannabis space. The cannabis is not just another item that we've put on our website and said, oh, we're in cannabis. We do cannabis and cannabis only, and we focus on cannabis day in and day out. So with Buds Group, we're going to not only work with you and give you advice, we're going to help see your project through to completion. And you're going to find at the end of the day, it'll be a fraction of a cost of working with a larger firm because our executives are focused just on cannabis and we run lean.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
That's a wrap on this episode of the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis. If you liked what you heard, smash that like and subscribe button, follow us on your favorite platform, and share this episode with your network. We've got more industry movers, shakers, and game changers coming your way every week. So don't miss a beat. Tune in next time for another fresh episode with Aaron and Jimmy.